We're breaking down edge prospects for the Buffalo Bills in the 2024 NFL Draft today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. We are going to continue our draft discussions for the Buffalo Bills, getting ready, taking a look at prospects. And today, we're focusing on a batch of edge rushers. And we did an episode already where we looked at a bunch of different wide receivers. Today is a batch of edge rushers. And our entire objective here is we're going to create the 2024 Buffalo Bills NFL Draft Board. I've done this for a number of years now, and it's time for the 2024 iteration. And we're going to be really thorough in how we discuss these prospects and stack the board. And at the end of this, I'll have a board that you guys can all have to follow along with on draft day. Now, one thing that I do want to point out is that this is simply a batch of edge defenders. It's not my top 6 edge defenders. It's not my highest graded ones. It is literally just a batch of 6. We're going to do at least one more episode on edge rushers. So just keep that in mind. Just like the last batch of wide receivers was simply a batch of wide receivers, we probably have 2 or 3 more batches of wide receivers to get to. So just keep that in mind. I had some questions coming out of the wide receiver episode where people were like, were these the ones that you had first round grades on? Like, what was what were those players? Why didn't you talk about player X? Why didn't you talk about Xavier Worthy or Xavier Leggett? Well, that's because we didn't talk about them in that episode. They're coming up in a future episode. So keep that in mind as we work through this. So today, edge rushers, we're going to talk about 6 of them. Dallas Turner from Alabama, Jared Verse from Florida State, Chop Robinson from Penn State, Marshawn Kneeland from Western Michigan, and Adisa Isaac out of Penn State. So why are we talking about edge rushers? Well, I think the Bills have a need there. Gregory Rousseau, love him. Really like the trajectory there. I think he's a quality starting defensive end in the NFL. You have A.J. Epenesa back on a 2-year deal, who I think is an ideal defensive end 2.5, right? Like probably best as a 3rd guy, passable as a 2, but more of a piece of your rotation as opposed to like a fixture playmaker. Then you got that Von Miller guy, 35 years old, really struggled coming off of that ACL last year. We'll see what he looks like. And I'm still not quite comfortable thinking about Von Miller as a high impact piece of this group. And so that probably is a big piece of where my concern for the edge rusher group currently is on this team. If Von Miller's going to be that dude, well, then I'm not going to be as concerned. But I don't know if he's going to be that dude. He certainly wasn't last year, and he's 35. So I'm just trying to be real about it. Then you have Casey Toohill. I talked about him last week, a free agent acquisition. I think he's a defensive end 4. And then Kingsley Jonathan, who I think we all have a soft place for, but in reality, even at Syracuse, was never like a high impact player. So I think that there's room for impact now, and I think there's a lot of room for impact beyond this year, and there could be some very appealing options for the Buffalo Bills in the 2024 NFL Draft, both in the 1st round, 2nd round, 3rd round. So we're going to start breaking down who those targets could be, and we're going to start right now, and we'll get to Dallas Turner, who's an edge rusher from Alabama. I do have a 1st-round grade on him. 6'3", 247 pounds, 34 3/8 inch arms, 9 7/8 on the hands. RAS score of a 9.37 for his career, 32.5 tackles for loss, 22.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year this past season. He's been productive, and boy, oh boy, is he athletic with great length. So again, we're going to ask ourselves 2 questions with every single prospect as we try to paint these pictures. First question is, why should the Buffalo Bills consider drafting this player? And number 2, what concerns are there about forecasting this player to the Buffalo Bills? And yeah, you're probably thinking, Joe, why are you talking about Dallas Turner? He could be the first defensive player off the board. Yeah, you're right, he could. But I think it's important as we work through all of the prospects that you hear the way I discuss guys like this, and you can contrast that to, all right, well, maybe these are more realistic options for the Bills, and you can kind of get an idea for where the talent level is and what the tiers are with these prospects, excuse me. So why should the Bills consider drafting Dallas Turner? Well, he's a smooth, dynamic athlete, ton of length, super flexible. So if you like burst, bend, and length, which you should, if you like edge rushers, he's got the goods. I like his ability to convert speed to power. He's got some real upside with the length and how he uses a one-arm stab to really set up his rush plan. And yeah, he's only like 247 pounds, but you look at him and you don't feel like this frame is maxed out at all. If he needs to put on weight, he can. And I think he's pretty thick throughout, but certainly room to add weight if the NFL team that invests in him chooses to do that. Can really work around edges and corner and bend and flatten. And he's got really, really good contact balance, really, really good closing bursts. I like how he takes pride in doing the little things at the position. He chips tight ends. He takes on pullers. He's a fundamentally sound player. And for a smaller guy, don't get it confused that he can't defend the run. He's a more than capable run defender. If you want to have him do some short area zone drops, he can certainly do that in coverage. He's got really terrific lateral movement skills and overall athleticism to play in space a little bit. And I think he's got very likable pursuit effort and motor in terms of his effort on a snap-to-snap basis. So there's a lot to like in this player. Again, potentially the first defensive player drafted, potentially, of course, the first edge rusher drafted. So what concerns are there about forecasting Dallas Turner to the Buffalo Bills? Well, I still think he has room to develop his pass rush arsenal. There's room for more counters. There's more in the tank for him to maximize his impressive physical package in terms of length and speed and flexibility, and really becoming more of a sack artist, if that makes sense. I think there's room for that. Maybe you wish he had a little bit more pop in his hands, right? You talk about, how firm your strikes are and how that helps you, get hands off of your body, how that helps you control reps. I think he can get more pop in his hands. And, I think he's a guy that is a good run defender, but I think there's probably some room for him to become a little bit better processor and not allow himself to get reach blocked and maintain that outside leverage with a little bit more consistency. He's very reliant on athleticism. He knows he can make up for maybe not necessarily being in the right place with how he can respond with quickness. That's a little bit mitigated at the next level. So you'd want to be mindful of that. But my goodness, a really exciting prospect that if he's there at 28, I'd be stunned, but certainly a guy that has the makings of an impact guy at the next level. Let's get to Jared Verse, edge rusher from Florida State, 6'4", 254 pounds, 33.5-inch arms, 9 7/8 on the hand size, an RAS score of a 9.56. He transferred in from Albany State to Florida State and had 2 really good seasons for the Seminoles, 29.5 tackles for loss, 18 sacks, 3 pass breakups, forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries over the last 2 years at Florida State. It's worth noting that he will turn 24 during his rookie season, so a slightly older prospect. So why should the Bills consider drafting Jared Verse? Well, I think he's really in so many ways a guy that checks the most boxes of any player that we're going to talk about amongst edge rushers. So if you like guys that just check boxes and doesn't really have a whole lot missing from the resume, you're going to love Jared Verse. I think the name of the game with Verse is power. He is really, really powerful. Firm, good core strength, heavy hands, the ability to squeeze gaps, to win with speed to power conversion. He's got that. And he's got power to go with athleticism. So he's quick, he's explosive, and he's powerful. That is an exciting package. I think he's got a deadly ability to convert speed to power and bull rush and collapse to width of the pocket. Explosive off the ball. He's got the speed to win around the edge. He's got enough flexibility to bend around the top of the arc. And like I said, those hands are really, really heavy. He plays with good length and extension. He's got good length. He's 33.5-inch arms. And his overall motor and effort is outstanding on every single snap. I mean, there's just so much to like about this football player. In terms of, all right, well, what concerns exist about forecasting this player to the Buffalo Bills? I would say if there's something that's frustrating about Jared Verse, it's everything that I just said. And yet you still have games where the impact wavered. And it's frustrating because you know he has the clear ability to dominate every single game. But there were some games last year where he just was kind of quiet, and it really kind of took him a bit of time into the season to really start making the plays that we saw him make his first season at Florida State. Eventually it came, but it was kind of gradual, and he was quiet at certain times throughout the course of the season. I think tackling can be problematic. It's kind of disappointing, some of the misses that he has on tape. And I still think that there are some run fits that he'll run himself out of, kind of getting too far up the field on some run downs, but I think that's more something you could coach up. Also, you're not drafting Jared Verse to play in space and play in coverage. So that wouldn't, for 3-4 teams that want to drop him into space all the time, that would be a silly use of his skill set. But I think he has the makings of an impact defensive end in a 4-3 scheme. And if he was available for the Bills at 28, I'd sprint to the podium and not think twice about it. All right, coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk about probably my favorite edge rusher that I think it's possible he could be there at 28. And then a Penn State pass rusher that you're going to hear how I feel about Mr. Chop Robinson. I know that the opinions are all over the place. I'll share mine in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. My favorite edge rusher in this class is Laiatu Latu out of UCLA. And what it really comes down to is when I watch the tape, I just get excited. And I think that matters a lot. You can scout traits, and you should. That should be the core of what you do when you're studying prospects and you're grading film and you're evaluating them for the next level. But how do they make you feel? And I'll tell you what, when I watch Laiatu Latu, I just get excited. He plays football the way it ought to be played. So let's talk about him. Edge rusher out of UCLA, Laiatu Latu, 6'5", 259, 32 5/8 on the arms, 9 5/8 on the hands, an RAS score of a 9.35. So really, really good athlete. Maybe you wish he had a little bit more length, but I'm far from concerned about that. For his career, 34 tackles for loss, 23.5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, and an interception. Actually, that's not for his career. That's just the last 2 seasons at UCLA. Now, the big thing with Laiatu that we got to establish right off the bat is that he began his career at Washington, and then he medically retired due to a neck injury. And then he sat out a season, and he transferred to UCLA. And over the last 2 years at UCLA, he has been phenomenal. But there was a point in time where he was medically retired due to a neck injury. And so that is just going to be an important layer of the conversation. When it comes to medical stuff, what's amazing to me is that you can get the same data point. You can get the same information, and the team doctors for 32 different teams can have varying takeaways from that information. So there's a chance Laiatu is not even on some teams' boards just because they fail him medically. I don't know enough about the neck injury to really comment. I'm certainly not a doctor. I can tell you that for the last 2 years at UCLA, he's been unbelievable and hasn't had any injury concerns. But, I mean, the guy was medically retired at one point with a neck injury, and so you're certainly mindful of that. But what I can talk about is the player I watched on tape, and boy, is he a good one. Why should the Bills consider drafting Laiatu Latu? I mean, he's tough to block. This guy completely overwhelmed offensive tackles for the last 2 years at UCLA. He's quick, tremendous body control, tremendous hand usage. He's got big-time power, and he's got a nonstop motor. He is an elite competitor. He rushes with a plan on every snap, and he's got moves on top of moves on top of moves. I mean, I cannot believe how full the toolbox is of moves that he can deploy when rushing the passer. They just never stop coming. And I love that. Sometimes you just see guys, and we're going to talk about guys here as we continue with this conversation that just kind of, well, they're powerful. Well, they're quick. They're flexible. Laiatu has pass rush moves. He knows how to deconstruct and beat blocks. I love the pass rush profile here. He's not the most bendy guy, but he can tilt, he can reduce, he can flatten his surface area, and he's got really good closing bursts. When he's able to get that little bit of separation from a block, his ability to just power through and finish is exceptional. And he's a guy that when you just watch the tape, when you watch UCLA, he is impossible to miss. His presence is felt routinely on every single snap. He doesn't disappear. He's a high-impact playmaker. And I think he's a solid run defender that can set firm edges, good speed-to-power conversion ability, has counters. I talked about it, counters on top of counters, and a very good bull rush. There's so much to love about Laiatu. Well, what concerns about forecasting this player to the Buffalo Bills? It's the injury, right? It's the neck deal. You want to make sure that that's good to go. I think maybe you wish he had a little bit more length. Maybe you wish he played with a little bit better leverage. You know, he's 6'5", every bit of 6'5". So yeah, the pad level can be a little bit inconsistent. But boy, if the medicals are good, if the medicals check out, I mean, this is a sprint to the podium type player if he's available at 28. So you can tell I really like the top three edge rushers, and those are my top three. And actually, the order is Laiatu versus Turner, and they're all very closely graded for me, kind of like mid first round grades in any draft. Those guys, if they're there at 28, it would be an easy choice. It would be a very easy choice for me, but I don't know that they will. And so I think Laiatu has a chance just because I think there's going to be some variance with how teams process the medicals and if they're on the board or not. So just keep that in mind. Now, the rest of these prospects, I think, are very, very much in play for the Bills at 28. And then really the last two are more day two options. But let's get to the Chop Robinson conversation. Edge rusher out of Penn State, 6'3", 254 pounds, 33.5-inch arms, 9 1/8-inch hands, an RAS score of a 9.72. For his career, 20 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. So 254 pounds. Now, if you think he's small, I mean, we just talked about Laiatu at 259. We talked about Verse at 254. We talked about Turner at 247. So, like, miss me with that he's small, because he's not. He's exactly the same size as these players that we just talked about. And I know how Bills Mafia can be, right? A smaller edge rusher that's explosive out of Penn State that had modest career production. I know what you're going to say. You're going to start bringing up Aaron Maben, and boy, oh boy, I think there could be nothing more lazy than invoking the name Aaron Maben when discussing Chop Robinson, because they went to the same school like 15 years apart. Like, that is just such a silly, silly thing to talk about. So save it. Save it. If you want to not like Chop Robinson, okay, we could talk about that. You could talk about the things that are missing from his skill set that aren't that give you concern about him at the next level. But if you come at me with Aaron Maben, I can't even listen to that. I can't even listen to that. Those are two completely unique football players and human beings that played at Penn State at completely different times. There is nothing to extrapolate from the case study that is Aaron Maben and apply it to Chop Robinson. That's the last I'm going to mention it. Now let's talk about Chop Robinson, who I actually really, really like. I think this is a very dynamic prospect. Why should the Buffalo Bills consider drafting Chop Robinson? Explosive speed off the edge. His first step, probably the best in the class. His ability to get off the ball. He is sudden. He is twitchy. He is bursty. And he complements that with really outstanding bend. He can very tightly corner edges and run at a steep angle. He can really get low to the ground and turn. And it's tough for these offensive tackles to get their hands on him because he doesn't offer them much surface area, and he can run with unbelievable flexibility and at a steep angle and carry a ton of speed through that steep angle. His pursuit effort, his motor is outstanding. He competes from snap to whistle. And for a guy that kind of has a lean looking frame, he converts speed to power a lot better than you think he's going to. He can set firm edges a lot better than you think he's going to be able to do because he's got length and he plays with good leverage and he can outquick just about anybody he goes up against. Love the twitch, love his ability to slip around blocks. I think he's got a really good feel for finding soft spots in the pocket and attacking. You want to get him going on twists and stunts in games. I think he'll be really, really strong at that, in addition to his ability to win with speed off the edge. When you ask him to shoot gaps and cross the face of an offensive lineman, he is terrific. And I think he's got pretty good rush variety as well. There's a fair, and nobody's got Laiatu rush variety. Don't get it twisted, but he's got plenty. So what concerns are there about forecasting him to the Bills? Well, I still think he can fill out his frame. He's got kind of a lean, narrow build about him. He's not small. If you think he's small, then you better call everyone else that we've discussed to this point small too. But I think there's some leanness to him, and I think he can fill out a little bit more. And I think that shows up like, okay, it's only an issue if it's an issue. There are times where you feel like Chop Robinson's contact balance can be problematic, like playing through contact and how he's able to sustain himself and maintain control of his frame. I think that can be hit or miss. I still think he's learning to deploy his athleticism the best that it can, right? Like you can have all these traits, but how you deploy them on a football field is what really matters. And I think syncing up what he wants to do with his arms and his upper body versus his lower half, I think getting that all married up to really execute and deploy good pass rush moves, I think is still a work in progress. And I think that's evidenced by, like, you wish that he had more production. For a guy that has this type of speed and length and flexibility, you'd like to have a little bit more than 20 tackles for loss, 11 and a half sacks, and 3 forced fumbles, right? Like there's some production that you wish existed with him. And I think he's still learning to put it all together. But I think the ceiling here, the skill set that he could offer to the Bills, like, I think he's a twitchier, bendier, more explosive version of Leonard Floyd. So yeah, sign me up for that all day long. I would be through the moon if the Bills got Chop Robinson at 28. So those are probably, I know I said at the beginning that I'm not really like giving you my top 6 or anything like that. Those are probably going to be my top 4. Laiatu versus Turner, Chop Robinson, probably my top 4 edge rushers, and I would love any of them at pick 28. All right, coming up on the other side of it, we're going to get into a couple of day 2 prospects, some guys that we need to talk about because I think they will be on the Bills' radar. We're going to discuss Marshawn Kneeland and Adisa Isaac here in just a second, so be sure to stick with me. All right, folks, welcome back. A couple more players to get into. Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan, and then Adisa Isaac, the running mate to Chop Robinson at Penn State. So let's talk about Marshawn Kneeland first. He's got a lot of exciting physical upside in terms of his size and athleticism. 6'3", 267 pounds, 34.5-inch arms, 9 1/8-inch hands. So pretty much the size you're looking for. RAS score of a 9.58. So top tier athlete with tremendous size. For his career, 28 tackles for loss, 12.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. Did come to Western Michigan after playing tight end in high school, made the switch to defensive end in college. And let me go ahead and say this, like, this is not a first round prospect to me. This is more, all right, we're talking pick 60. This is where Marshawn Kneeland comes into play for me. So why should the Bills consider drafting Marshawn Kneeland? Size, athleticism, body type, I mean, those are ideal. He's got the body composition you're looking for and the athleticism you're looking for. And his ability to win with power is really exciting. Heavy hands, he converts speed to power. He can work through and reduce rush angles. He plays with good length. He's got power for days. I'm not sure we're going to see a more powerful defensive end in this class. I mean, Verse probably has him because I think he knows how to use his power a little bit better, but the name of the game with Kneeland is power. His motor is always cranked. The pursuit effort is outstanding. I really enjoyed watching him at Western Michigan because they moved him all around. Like, he would rush mostly off the edge, of course, but they weren't shy about putting him like standing up in the A-gaps and asking him to beat a guard, even sometimes a stand-up outside rush linebacker. Like they got him going up and down the line of scrimmage with his different rush alignments, and I think that's smart for a guy that has his power combination, his power and athleticism combination. And another reason why I think the Bills should be interested in this player is like I think there's so much room for development. We're going to talk about his concerns in just a second, but the room for upward mobility, like if you want to just bet on traits, get this guy and coach him up, I think there's just so much to unlock. Now, what concerns are there about forecasting Marshon Kneeland to the Bills? Well, I still think he's just a work in progress. Everything he does is predicated on power and overmatching his opponent, right? Like at Western Michigan, he was just bigger and stronger and more physical than these other guys, and he would just play right through them. Now, I saw him play against Syracuse and Iowa, which is good. Those are Power 5 schools, but still, it's just power all the time. He needs to add more to his game. Needs more rush variety. He can't just bull rush and play through the edges against offensive linemen in the NFL. I think he's a flashy run defender, but I don't think he's consistently firm, and that's because he's more of a reactionary player. He's more of a visual player than a reactionary player. And so I think he needs to kind of stand up and see what's going on. And then when he does that, his pad level gets up, and then guys are able to get into his frame and kind of turn him out and those types of things. So because I don't think instinctively he's there, I think that takes away from his pad level, which causes some issues in the run game. And I just think for him, everything needs to happen a little bit quicker. He's kind of slow off the ball. Again, more of a visual player than a reactionary player. And kind of reminds me of like Yetur Gross-Matos coming out of Penn State a few years ago. All the tools in the world, but he just didn't. It's kind of a slow burn to the way that he plays. And in order for you to win one-on-one, you got to get off the ball, and you got to have a lot of different ways that you can win. You can't be thinking all the time. And I think you see that. You can feel the thinking going on for Marshon Kneeland. So an appealing, like high tools day 2 prospect. But I think you draft Marshon Kneeland, and you got to be mindful that it might take a little time to get it all going for him. The last player is Adisa Isaac, another edge rusher from Penn State, 6'4", 247, 33 7/8 on the arms, 9 5/8 on the hands, 8.93 RAS score. So a tick below some of these guys we've talked. All these other guys have been well into the 9s. He's an 8.93. Over the last 2 seasons at Penn State, Isaac has collected 27 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks, and a forced fumble. So why should the Bills consider drafting Adisa Isaac? Well, I love the effort. He's a max effort player on every snap. I think he offers versatility. You see him at Penn State as a hand in the dirt defensive end. You saw him as a 3-4 outside linebacker, so that's likable. Can handle short zone drops. He can play in space a little bit. You ask him to shoot gaps and slant. I like how he can cross face and attack some of the interior gaps. And I think for a guy that is, 247 pounds, I think he does pretty well to play with extension and set some firm edges. And I think he does a really good job of maximizing his length, which helps him keep blockers away from his frame. It also gives him a bit more radius to be able to make tackles. And I think that's why he's able to play in space as well as he does. And then I do think he's got pretty good closing burst when he's able to slip through an angle. What concerns exist with Adisa Isaac? Well, you just wish he was a little bit more dynamic. I wish he had a little bit more size, a little bit more strength, more flexibility, a little bit more explosive. And for this type of player at 247 pounds, if he's not able to soften the edge and he gets stuck kind of going body to body with blockers, it's kind of game over for him. And I think his contact balance is average. And then I think there's some discipline issues as a pass rusher where he can get too far up the field, kind of run himself beyond the peak of the pocket. And, that can be frustrating for me, especially against like these mobile quarterbacks that will make you pay for not being disciplined with your rush lanes. I think Adisa Isaac has too many warts in that capacity. So this is very comfortably like the lowest graded player of the ones that we're talking about today. I would think of him more appropriately in the 3rd round. The Bills don't have a 3rd round pick. I think he'd be too high for me at 60. I see I've seen mock drafts with him going towards the end of the 1st round. That's not the range for me with Isaac. So I think not only is he the least clean projection to the Bills, I think there's the most questions about his skill set and what his actual ceiling is. And some of the missing pieces of his skill set make me concerned. So would not be in love with this type of pick. At the right, like if the Bills got him in the 4th round, cool. I'm down. I'm not sure he'd make much sense to me in the 1st or the 2nd round. So there you have it. We talked about 6 edge prospects for the Bills in the draft. We're going to get to more of them, right? I got a lot more that I want to get to. Again, we're just chipping away at this thing. We're going to have a lot of episodes just like this throughout the coming weeks as we get ready for this 2024 NFL draft. And I answer the question, what do I think about these prospects? And you're going to know come draft day exactly what I think about these prospects. And I think this is important because once they get drafted by the Bills, it's easy to put that different set of glasses on and know that they're a Bill. And I think they can take away from your ability to really evaluate and see them cleanly. And there's probably going to be some players the Bills draft that I never heard of, and we'll have to go back and watch the tape. I'll be as honest as I can with you. But I want to cover as much ground as I can before the draft so we can be really authentic and honest about what these players are ahead of time. Because like I said, there is that when you put on that lens that they're on the Bills, it can skew it a little bit. You fight hard against it, but it's just reality. So there you have it. We're probably going to do a few more episodes this week just like this. We got safeties to get into, more receivers, interior defensive linemen, offensive line. So much draft talk coming up here on this podcast. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.